Organic living soil is different to what you might find just in the ground. It's not dirt, yeah, it's not just dirt, it's not dust. It revolves around the life in the soil. That's the living part, yeah, the organic living soil. So until recently, we didn't really even know that there's more life in a teaspoon of dirt than there is stars in the universe. You can actually get it in a microscope and examine it. There's tons and tons and tons of these tiny, tiny little microbes of all these thousands of different species, all sort of competing in that space. They all have different jobs and they all have different roles, and we're only really just learning about it now, but that's what organic living soil is. It's all about that life, and that life we term is the soil food web. Yeah, and when we understand the soil has life in it, we understand how the plant works and how the plant actually isn't just on its own, it's actually interacting with that soil life to be able to make the minerals it needs, because it can't eat rock, yeah, it can't eat sand, it can't eat dust. Once the plants start asking for these things, as we said, they'll ask for this and they'll ask for that, they'll ask for this and they'll ask for that. The microbes will then run off and it'll find a bit of gypsum it works on or whatever else, and it'll use an enzyme, it'll break that down, makes it into its elemental form, makes it soluble, and the plant can drink it up. Job's a good one. Yeah, so this here is our Soil for Life blend. As you can see, it kind of may look like any bag medium on first impressions, nice and dark. But you'll notice the white piece of the pumice, that's our primary aeration that we use. But this is kind of how you want it. You don't want it to sort of be too wet that it sort of squeezes water out, but you want it to sort of hold together a little bit, and that's why we say we work so hard on the structure, because as you can see, it holds together when it needs to, it falls apart readily, easily. So yes, so we'll talk about some of the things we put in it and what order and how we actually make it for anyone who's interested. So as mentioned, our Soil for Life comes from a cocoa coir base. Your options are really coir or peat, to be fair. Much of a muchness when it comes to the end products. Probably just depends on whether you have an issue over the sourcing of one or the other. What's better? Is it better to dig it out of a bog in Ireland where we may potentially run out one day, or is it better to send it from the other side of the world in a container ship? I don't know. So each to their own. But we use cocoa coir because when we first started out, we could get a very, very high quality, organically produced cocoa coir. And some of the recipes we were sort of more keen on were sort of using it. So we used it to start with, and we were happy with it, and we've run with it ever since. Then when it comes to your aeration element, like I said, your choices are kind of really pumice, perlite, rice hulls, or buckwheat. I haven't got any buckwheat here to show you, but this is pumice. As you can see, it looks similar to perlite, but it's actually like an actual broken up rock rather than perlite is an industrial process to make it sort of like fluff up. It's like makes it airy. But pumice is, say, like an actual hard piece of broken up rock, so it doesn't sort of float to the surface. It doesn't move in the soil mix like perlite does, but it still provides great aeration properties. So like I said, they use a third of that, and then a third of the compost. So the compost, like I said, it's all about the right kind of microbes within it. Ideally, if it brings some nutrition with it, great. Like I said, the compost we use, one of them is made with bracken and sheep's wool with a little bit of comfrey, and the other one comes from organic dairy cows and some straw bedding with a little bit of composted bark. And then we also use some vermicompost. So vermicompost, as the name suggests, is just vermi, which is a German word for worm, and compost. So ideally, a vermicompost should be compost that is then eaten by worms and pooped out. That's what vermicompost is. And the benefit of it going through a worm is it applies all the enzymes and some other microbes, which really kickstart the whole sort of soil life system. Most vermicompost or worm castings you're going to buy, unfortunately, it's really just cheap bedding with some sort of carbohydrate sort of feed to grow big worms, and it's not really any good to anybody. So yeah, you got to be quite careful where you get it from and how it's made, but if you ask the questions, then you'll know. And yeah, high quality compost, high quality vermicompost, 3 equal parts across the base mix, and then that gets blended together. Typically can make about 1,000 litres at a time. It goes all on a tarp and then raked through till that's thoroughly blended. Another input we added for some aeration is biochar. Biochar looks like charcoal, kind of smells like charcoal, but isn't charcoal. The main way to tell the difference is it's a lot lighter. Yeah, it shouldn't really weigh more than about 400 grams a litre, because the way it's made is, the whole point of making it is to try and oxidize everything except the carbon, and just therefore leave loads of tiny microscopic porous holes within it, which if not done properly, that isn't achieved. And the whole point of having all those holes in, like I said, that adds aeration in the soil mix. It can also help retain water if it gets too dry, but it creates fantastic homes for microbes. So if you do have any issues with your soil where it may get dried out too much or get too wet, you know there's always these little homes where your microbes are going to be, you know, hiding out to come and repopulate your soil again. So yeah, it's a biochar. It's a premium amendment. It should be made from hardwood. Ours is made with birchwood and birchwood only. And like I said, also another way to check the quality is you may get some residue on your fingers, but once you wash it, it should all wash away very cleanly. If there's any sort of oil or any tar and you left, then you know it's bad quality. So this is kind of what we're all about. You know, everything we use has to be examined very thoroughly. It has to be tried and tested. We have to understand, you know, what makes a good quality version, what makes a bad quality version. So yeah, so your base mix is complete, piled up. Then you need to add some nutrition. So your bulk of your amendment mix is going to be your basalt and your gypsum. Now basalt is another way of saying volcanic rock dust. So when a volcano erupts all its magma all over the earth, that is fully mineralized. It has all, like I said, loads and loads of minerals, loads of iron, loads of trace elements basically that you wouldn't always get from a plant or from an animal. The only challenge with basalt is it's so slow releasing. You kind of have to use lots of it to make sure there's enough surface area for the microbes to work it, because as you can see, some of it's a bit chunky, which in effect would probably last forever, but it's the dusty bits that sort of the microbes will feed on initially. But as well as that, basalt is really, really good in the soil mix, because if you do accidentally use too much of something, it's very good at binding it up and keeping a good balance in the soil. Yeah, so now if we move on to nutrients, shall we say, if we call them the nutrient group, like I said, this is when you get the vast majority of, say, your nitrogen, your potassium, your phosphorus, your calcium, magnesium, and then we try to obviously cover a lot of the, you know, the minor ones as well, you know, boron, manganese, all these, molybdenum, all these sorts of things. Now we can get most of these things from plants, from sure, like we said before, things like kelp meal, it all covers 85 minerals on the periodic table, so they're pretty much all covered in kelp, so you could pretty much do it just with kelp, to be fair, but we like to diversify, and that's when, say, the neem, likewise, nicely balanced, brings in plenty of nitrogen and loads of other benefits too, trace minerals, hormones, all sorts of good stuff. We'll also bring in some fish meal here, some krill meal. The reason we do use animals, sea creatures, you know, maybe the vegans out there wouldn't want to use these, and that's understandable, but we're going to use something. We'll use what is the least damaging to the earth, what is the most sustainable if we have a choice. So most soil mixes will talk about putting crab meal in it. The reason we don't use crab meal is because when you collect crabs, you tend to collect everything. Probably 100 other species will go with it, and yeah, it's not the best way in our opinion. So we're looking, well, what's the alternatives? There's shrimp, similar sort of situation, and then we found krill. Now, although not 100% ideal, the good thing with krill is it's harvested from the South Antarctic. Species wise, at the same time, the only thing that's there with them is whales, and they're pretty easy to avoid. So it means you get virtually zero bycatch with it. It's also one of the most strictly managed fisheries in the world. So when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to actually, you know, all that side of things, we feel actually that is probably the most, you know, vegan friendly, animal friendly, world friendly way to approach that problem. So that's most of your nutrition. Like I said, we also bring in some frass, the charged product you're probably familiar with from EcoThrive. So yeah, it's kind of like all these colors and all these things, all their multiple benefits all brought together, all kind of in the right sort of balance. And then once you've created that and you've got your soil mix, you pile it all up, you get it wet, and then it's got to go for a cooking process. When you do pile it up and it starts warming up, the important thing is to then break it up and get oxygen back into it, because if you don't, once the oxygen's used, that's when you go from an aerobic system to an anaerobic system, and that's where pathogens exist. So that's the important thing with making the soil mix, is it's all based on oxygen, it's all based on healthy microbes. It takes about 3 days to sort of reach maximum temperature, and at that point, so you break it all down again, you lay it out, you blend it through, you pile it up again. 2 days later, roughly, it reaches temperature. Break it down, pile it up, break it down, pile it up, break it down, pile it up. It will slowly start to cool down, and then by the time after sort of 2-3 weeks it's cooled down to room temperature, then you know it's stable. All of those hot amendments that are sort of released fast have all sort of been burnt off and all been used by the microbes. We load the biochar and the buckwheat husks into it, which are sort of nearly pure carbon, which kind of locks a lot of nutrition into it, so like reserve nutrition. And that's kind of in a nutshell what it is, you know. Like I said, all these things thrown together in the right way, in the right order, and a little bit of care, a little bit of attention. Anybody can do it. You don't have to use these exact things, you know, you can use pretty much anything that's around you. It's really quite simple. We encourage people to make their own, but of course, if it's a little bit too difficult, a little bit too daunting, you haven't got the time and space, and we'd love to do it for you.